To test thumb MCP extension, you're going to have your client's forearm in mid position resting on the ulnar border, the wrist in neutral, and the thumbnail facing the ceiling. The test position is going to be the thumb in mid extension. I'm going to stabilize the first metacarpal and the wrist as it's still in the neutral position. I'm going to apply pressure to the dorsal surface of the proximal phalanx toward MP flexion. Okay, so I'm going to try and bend your finger down, but don't let me, okay? Okay. Ready, go. Good. To test thumb MCP extension in the gravity minimized position, you're going to have your client's forearm fully pronated, resting on the volar surface. You're going to place your stabilization here. I'm going to have their thumb in mid extension, their thumb IP or MCP joint. I'm going to block their first metacarpal because we're not doing radial abduction. We're just doing MCP extension of the thumb. So as I block this and provide stabilization and she does the extension movement, I'm going to be palpating for EPL. Okay, go ahead and do that move for me. Good. To test thumb IP extension in the against gravity position, you're going to have the forearm in mid position, the wrist neutral, resting on the ulnar border. The MP joint is going to be slightly in mid extension and the IP joint is going to be flexed. I'm going to provide stabilization to the wrist in neutral. I could grab it this way or I could do it this way. This is more comfortable for where I'm sitting, so I'm going to do it like this. I'm going to apply my stabilization to the first metacarpal and the proximal phalanx. Then I'm going to apply pressure to the distal phalanx toward flexion. Okay, so I'm going to try and push this part of your thumb down to the table, okay, but don't let me. Okay, ready, go. Good. To test thumb IP extension in the gravity minimized position, you're going to have your client's forearm fully pronated, and I'm going to have the thumb in mid extension again with the DIP flex slightly. I'm going to provide stabilization to the proximal phalanx and to the first metacarpal. As she starts to do the motion, I'm going to be palpating for EPB. Okay, so go ahead. For thumb MCP flexion in the against gravity position, you're going to have your client seated with shoulder internally rotated, flexed to 90 degrees. The forearm's going to be fully pronated and the thumbnail is going to be facing the floor. I'm going to put the thumb in mid flexion and I'm going to stabilize the wrist and the first metacarpal. I'm going to apply pressure to the volar surface of the proximal phalanx toward MCP extension. So I'm going to try and pull your finger down and don't let me, okay? Okay. Ready? Good. Good. For thumb MCP flexion in the gravity minimized position, you're going to have your client seated with their forearms supinated, resting in the therapist's hand or on the table. You're going to have their thumb, again, go in about mid-flexion. And once they start doing the flexion motion, you're going to be feeling for flexor pollicis brevis. So you're going to feel up in here for it. Okay, so go ahead and do that for me. Okay, actually move your finger in. Good. For thumb IP flexion in the against gravity position, you're going to have your client flex their shoulder to 90 degrees. Their forearm's going to be fully pronated and their thumbnail is going to be facing the floor. I'm going to put, for the testing position, their thumb in mid flexion. I'm going to stabilize the wrist and the first metacarpal again, and I'm going to have their IP joint slightly flexed. I'm going to apply pressure to the top of the IP joint and I'm going to try and push it down. Okay, so don't let me move your finger down. Ready? Good. To test thumb IP flexion in the gravity minimized position, we're going to have the forearm fully pronated and we're going to have the thumb in mid flexion. I'm going to go ahead and block and support her proximal phalanx while her distal phalanx does the movement. Okay, so I'm going to have you do that movement. Okay, and while she does that, I'm palpating on the inside of her thumb for FPL and APL. To test thumb palmar abduction in the against gravity position, you're going to have your client's forearm supinated, wrist neutral, thumb relaxed, and adduction against the index finger. For the test position, I'm going to take the thumb and slightly put it in abduction. I'm going to stabilize the wrist and I'm going to put pressure on the distal first metacarpal toward the palm. So don't let me move your thumb in, okay?
Okay.
Ready? Go. Good. To test thumb palmar abduction in the gravity minimized position, you're going to have the forearm and wrist in neutral, resting on the ulnar border. You're going to make sure these fingers stay straight while they do the palmar abduction movement. As they're doing that, you're going to be palpating for APL and the thenar eminence. Good. For thumb radial abduction in the against gravity position, you're going to have the client's forearm in neutral rotation, wrist neutral, thumb adducted, and slightly flexed across the palm. Okay, you're going to put their thumb in mid abduction. I'm going to stabilize the first metacarpals and the wrist, and I'm going to put pressure on the distal lateral surface of the first metacarpal toward flexion. So I'm going to try and push your metacarpal down, and don't let me push it down, okay? Ready? Go. Good. Thumb radial abduction in the gravity minimized position, you're going to have the client's forearm in supination with the dorsal surface resting on the table. When they do the movement, you're going to be palpating alongside their forearm, and you're palpating for APL and EPB. So go ahead and do that. Good. For thumb adduction in the against gravity position, you're going to have your client's forearm slightly elevated, forearm pronated, wrist in neutral, and palmar abduction. So I'm going to put her thumb in mid adduction, mid abduction, so right about in the middle. I'm going to apply my stabilization with my thumb. I'm going to apply stabilization to all the first metacarpals, and I'm going to apply stabilization to the wrist by wrapping my hand around the ulnar side and supporting it slightly above the resting surface. I'm going to put my fingers on the thumb on the MCP joint, and I'm going to push toward palmar abduction. Okay, so I'm going to try and push your thumb down, and don't let me, okay? Ready? Go. Good. For thumb adduction in the gravity minimized position, you're going to have the forearm and wrist in neutral, resting on the ulnar border. You're going to make sure that the rest of the hand is neutral, including the fingers and the wrist. She's going to go ahead and do the position, and I'm going to be palpating the thenar eminence, making sure that it's doing the muscles. Okay. Good. For MMT testing of opposition in the against gravity position, you're going to have the client seated with their forearms supinated, wrists neutral, thumb in palmar abduction, and fifth finger extended. Since the therapist is going to need both hands, you will apply some padding underneath to make it more comfortable for the client. Once you see that they can do the motion, you're going to have them go about halfway in opposition, and I'm going to pull apart both of their fingers, and that's where we're going to put the pressure. Okay, so I'm going to try and pull these fingers apart. So I'm going to pull on the metacarpals. Okay, ready? Set. Don't let me pull your fingers apart. Good. For opposition in the gravity minimized position, you're going to have the client's elbow flexed and resting on the table. The forearm and wrist are going to be in neutral, and the hand is going to be in an open position. You're going to make sure that they know the right movement to do first by guiding them, and then you're going to place both of your fingers on the pad so that you can palpate for the opponent's pollicis and the opponent's digiti minimi. Okay, go ahead and do the motion for me. Good.